The wind comes off the peaks like it has business with the living. A stagecoach door cracks open against February cold. A woman steps down onto frozen ruts, carpetbag in one hand, the other bare. She does not check her face in the glass. She stopped doing that somewhere past the Kansas line. At the edge of the street, a man waits, hatchet jaw, pale eyes already measuring what she carries and what it will cost to take it. He reaches for her arm. She stops walking, his fingers close harder. Something small and square slips from his coat and lands face up in the mud. A photograph. A woman. Mountains behind her. The year 1880 written on the back in a hand that knew better than to write more. From the pine trees north of the road, a tall shape steps into the open light. Gray eyes, no gun drawn, no words yet. The wind dies between one breath and the next. The man with the hatchet jaw turns. And the mountains keep watching. Nora Vane did not check her reflection before she stepped off the stagecoach. She had stopped doing that somewhere around the Kansas border. Around the same time, she stopped expecting the seats to get softer, or the wind to get warmer, or any of this to feel like a good idea. It wasn't a good idea. She knew that. She had known it for approximately 400 miles and had chosen to keep moving anyway, because the alternative was going back to Wichita with $42 and a pile of debt and a house that smelled like her dead husband and absolutely no plan. So, Colorado it was. The stagecoach groaned to a stop at the edge of Dunbar, and Nora climbed down before the driver even set the step. Her boots hit frozen dirt. Her traveling coat, good wool, once, now thin at the elbows, did nothing meaningful against the February air. Cold. Not Kansas cold. Not the kind of cold that makes you pull your collar up and move faster. This was Colorado cold. The kind that settles in and makes itself comfortable. The kind that says, I was here before you. I will be here after you. You are a temporary inconvenience. Nora stood for a moment and let it hit her. Fine. Cold. Noted. She picked up her carpetbag and looked at the town of Dunbar, Colorado, which was doing its very best to look like a place where reasonable decisions were made. It wasn't convincing. One main street. Mud frozen into ruts. A general store with a sign that had lost 2 letters and hadn't replaced them in what looked like several seasons. A hotel that described itself as such, using only the vaguest architectural evidence. A church at the far end of the street, white, small, stubbornly upright, that looked like the only building in town genuinely committed to its purpose. The mountains behind all of it were enormous, indifferent, rimmed with snow that caught the thin February light and threw it back at the sky. Nora had been a bookkeeper in Wichita for 3 years. She was accustomed to looking at numbers and finding where they didn't add up. This town did not add up. She noted it, moved on. Then she looked for Cleet Marrow. She had a picture of him. He had sent it with the 4th letter, a man of medium height, standing in front of what he described as his ranch, looking at the camera with the expression of a man trying to look like more than he was. She had studied that picture more than she should have. Not because he was handsome. He wasn't, particularly, but because she was trying to read what was underneath. She was good at that. 3 years of keeping land office books in Wichita had taught her that the numbers that mattered were usually the ones between the lines. The transfers that happened a little too fast, the valuations that drifted a little too conveniently, the names that appeared on too many documents. She had read Cleet Marrow's photograph the same way. She hadn't liked what she found, but she hadn't liked her other options either. And then her father's letter had come. The one from the lawyer in Pueblo, arriving 3 weeks after the rest of her father's effects, explaining that he had left her 40 acres of land in Cutter County, Colorado. Land she had never seen, land she hadn't known existed. Land described in the attached deed, with a surveyor's precision that meant nothing to her, except that it was hers, and it was somewhere, and it was the only thing she owned outright in the world. She had read that letter 4 times. Then she had written to the lawyer. Then she had written to Cleet Marrow and said yes, because $42 was not enough. And a dead husband's debts didn't wait for grief to finish. And Cleet Marrow's letters had described a man looking for a companion, a helpmate, someone to build a life alongside. The letters had been very good letters. She could admit that now, whoever had written them was skilled. He was standing at the edge of the street, and she recognized him from the photograph. And her first thought was, the photograph was taken at the best possible moment, in person. Cleet Marrow had a jaw like a hatchet, pale eyes that never settled on one thing for longer than it took to assess it. A handshake, she offered her hand out of reflex, what her mother had called professional courtesy, that closed around her fingers with the deliberate pressure of someone demonstrating something. Not greeting, testing, she kept her face still. "You're late," he said. "The stagecoach was late," she said. "I was on it." Something moved in his face, just around the corners of his mouth. The kind of expression that men like him thought nobody noticed. She noticed. "There are things we need to discuss," he said. "Before we get to the ranch. Before we get to the ranch." She held her carpet bag. "What things?" The arrangement. He was already moving, steering her by the elbow toward a wagon at the edge of the road, away from the street, away from what few people were moving through the cold morning air. Best done privately. Nora let herself be moved. For exactly 3 steps, then she stopped. He kept his hand on her arm. She looked at it, then up at him. "Mr. Marrow," she said, "I'd prefer to have any discussions about the arrangement in a public setting. A dining room would suit me, or the street would do." His grip tightened. Not much. Just enough to communicate that her preference had been noted and was not being incorporated into his plans. "It won't take long," he said. Then it won't take long in public. She had told herself in Wichita that she would not make it easy. That was the decision she had made somewhere around the Kansas border. Around the same time, she stopped checking her reflection. If this was going to go badly, and she had understood since somewhere past the Missouri state line that it might very well go badly, she was not going to assist. So she did not move. He moved for her. His hand came off her arm and connected with her jaw in a motion that was practiced, efficient. The act of a man who had done something like this before and knew how quickly it needed to happen in a public space. Nora did not scream. She had learned. Had always known, really, the way women learn things without being taught them. That screaming is an invitation. It gives men like this a problem to solve. It makes them larger and louder and more urgent about what they were already going to do. So she swallowed the blood, the taste of copper and cold. She straightened her spine, and she looked at him. That was when the photograph fell out of his coat pocket. He didn't notice. His attention was on her face, on whether she was going to cause a problem, on the wagon. And whatever was in it and how quickly he could get her into it. Height. The photograph landed face up, in the frozen mud between them, a woman. Young, dark-haired. Standing in a field that looked like Colorado, based on the mountains behind her. Nora looked at it for exactly the time it took to understand what she was seeing. Then she looked up at Cleet Marrow. His face changed. Not much. A slight, fast tightening. The expression of a man who has had something go wrong that he was not accounting for. Della Marrow, 1880. That was what it said on the back. She had already read it, upside down. In the half-second it had taken him to notice, the photograph was gone from his pocket. No year of death. Just 1880. Just a name written in someone's hand. His hand, she was nearly certain, with the quality of handwriting that appears when a person is trying not to write too much. When they are limiting themselves. When every instinct says write more and some other instinct says don't. Not a death date. Not died 1881. Not lost 1882. Just 1880. Which could mean anything, and meant one specific thing. I am not the first. She held that thought, flat and cold as the ground she was standing on. This was not the first time. Della Marrow, 1880. Some other woman, some other letters, some other arrangement, and whatever had happened to Della Marrow had not ended in a wedding. Or the date would not be written that way. She understood all of this in about 3 seconds. She was good at numbers between the lines. And then, from the stand of pine trees at the north edge of the road, a man stepped out. He was tall, not performing tall. Just actually tall, the kind that comes from generation rather than posture. Broad through the shoulders in the way of men who work outside, in all weather, and do not consider it something to mention. A coat that had been dark once, and had faded to something between brown and gray over what looked like several hard winters. A hat pulled low, a scar along the left side of his jaw, old silver, fully healed, the kind of scar that stops looking like an injury and starts looking like a feature. He had gray eyes, not gray like uncertain, not gray like the weather. Gray like the mountains right before a hard snow when the sky and the rock and the air all become the same color and you understand, looking at it, that something significant is about to happen. He was not pointing a gun. His right hand hung loose at his side, nowhere near his holster. He was not performing a threat. He looked like a man who had already decided how this was going to go and found no need to announce it. He said 4 words, "Take your hands off." Not loud, not urgent, just certain. The way a man speaks when he's not trying to convince anyone of anything, when he's simply stating a fact and giving the world time to adjust. Cleet Marrow went still. Everyone went still. Nora had the strange, suspended thought that the air itself had stopped. Cleet looked at the man, then at the wagon, then back at the man. She could see the calculations running behind those pale eyes. 3 columns of information: the man's size, the man's stillness, the position of his right hand, the distance to the wagon, the distance to the tree line, the absence of anyone else on this stretch of road. "This doesn't concern you," Cleet said. "I'll move when she moves," the man said, "without your hand on her. You have any idea who I am?" "Nope." The bluntness of it seemed to confuse Cleet for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough, the man's gray eyes moved to Nora. Not an assessment, not a look that measured or wanted anything. Just a direct, even look. The kind of look that was asking a question without words. "Are you all right? And what do you want to do?" She understood the question immediately. She did not know this man. She knew nothing about him except that he was standing between her and the wagon. Which was, in the current arithmetic, better than the alternative. She looked at the photograph still lying in the mud. Then she picked up her carpet bag, which she had set down at some point in the last 90 seconds, without noticing. "I am not going with this man willingly," she said clearly, to the air and the road and the 2 men and the frozen Colorado morning. "I am saying that plainly so there is no confusion about it later." Cleet's jaw tightened. His arm came up. He didn't finish the motion. The man from the trees was across the distance in a way that Nora would later try to reconstruct and give up on. One moment he was 10 feet away. The next his hand was on Cleet's wrist, and the sound that followed, the mechanical, specific sound of a grip being systematically broken, was something she felt in her back teeth. Cleet made a sound, stumbled back. The man from the trees was already turning, not fully, keeping Cleet in his peripheral vision, while his attention tracked to the 2 men who had been sitting in the wagon and were now standing beside it with their hands making intentions. "Don't," he said. Just that. Just the one word. The 2 men in the wagon did not move. Silence. Wind off the mountains. The stagecoach driver, on the box at the far end of the road, looking at a point above and beyond all of this, with the dedicated neutrality of a man who had decided this was not his business. Cleet straightened slowly, cradling his wrist. His face had cycled through several colors, very fast, and settled on something cold, controlled. The kind of expression that is not fear but is what fear looks like after a man has spent 20 years making sure nobody sees it. "You just made a serious mistake," Cleet said. "Name's Josiah Briggs." The man said, in exactly the same tone he'd said everything else. "In case you need to know who did this. Now step back." Cleet stepped back. The man, Josiah Briggs, turned to Nora. "Ma'am," he said, "there's a town, a quarter-mile north, in at the far end. Run by a woman named Dorothy. You'll be safe there tonight? Nora looked at him for a moment. She was a bookkeeper. She was good at determining what numbers were real. All right, she said. They walked. The town of Dunbar was small enough that a quarter-mile covered most of it. Josiah Briggs walked at an angle that kept himself between her and the road behind them. Not obvious about it. Just a consistent degree of positioning that she clocked immediately because she was paying attention to things like that. Had been since Wichita. Had been, if she was being honest, since long before Wichita. He did not offer to carry her bag. She noticed that. Watched upon him not do it, and understood after a moment that this was respect rather than indifference. He had not assumed she needed the help. He had simply walked beside her. He had offered his name to a man who threatened her. Not as a performance, not as a warning. Just, here is who did this. Take it or leave it. That was an unusual thing to do. She was still thinking about what it meant when he said, without looking at her, "You didn't scream." She glanced at him. No, most people in that situation would have. Screaming makes them angrier, she said. I've observed that. He was quiet for a few steps. You were watching his men. I saw you do it. Moving your eyes without moving your head. There were two of them in the wagon. I needed to know where they were. Yes, he said. Just that. Like she had confirmed something he'd already known. You were watching me, she said. Shh. I was watching the road. And I was on the road, he considered. You were the most interesting thing on it. She almost stopped walking. Managed not to. She said, you gave him your real name? Yes. That wasn't caution. No, he said. It wasn't. You wanted him to know. He looked at her for the first time since they'd started walking. The gray eyes, up close, were paying attention in a way that most people's eyes weren't. He was actually looking at her, not at her face as something to evaluate. Looking at her the way a person looks at another person when they want to know if they're all right. He'll find out one way or another, Josiah said. Better he finds out straight. Nora held his gaze. You know him. Not a question he didn't answer immediately. Which was, she was beginning to understand, its own kind of answer. I know of him, he said, finally. And the man behind him. There's a man behind him. There's always a man behind him. He looked back at the road. Men like Cleet Marrow don't build anything. They work for someone who does the building and the taking both. The wind came off the mountains and pressed against her face. Nora held her carpet bag. Inside it, at the very bottom, under her spare dress and her good gloves and her mother's Bible, was the deed to 40 acres of land she had never seen. She had put it there first. Before she packed anything else. Some instincts form early and don't need to be told twice. That deed your father left you, Josiah said. She stopped walking. He stopped too. Turned to face her. The mountains behind him were doing something complicated with the light. The snow catching the angle of mid-morning sun and returning it in a way that made everything look both closer and colder. How do you know about the deed? She said. I don't, he said. But a man like Cleet Marrow, using a correspondence agency to acquire a woman from Missouri, doesn't do that for company. The gray eyes were direct and entirely calm. He does it for something she carries. Nora looked at him for a long moment. Her mother had always said, a smart woman doesn't show her hand until she knows the game. But there was something about the way Josiah Briggs looked at her. Not pressing, not urgent, not trying to get anything. That made the usual calculation feel different. 40 acres, she said. East of Dunbar along the creek bed. My father acquired it 15 years ago. He said it would be worth something someday. She paused. I didn't understand how right he was until the letters started arriving. Josiah absorbed this, said nothing for a moment. Then, the railroad survey was done last fall. The route runs through the Eastern Creek Valley. Nora heard the words, understood them, felt them settle into place like a key into something she hadn't known was locked. He wants the land, she said. Not a wife. He wants the deed, Josiah said. The wife was a means to an end. Something moved along his jaw. The first visible sign of feeling she had seen from him. The man behind Cleet Marrow is named Edmund Rawle. He's been acquiring land in Dallas for 2 years. Legal purchase when he can manage it. Other means when he can't. His voice stayed even. You would have been other means. The cold was immense. Nora looked at the road ahead. She thought about $42. About a carpet bag with a deed at the bottom. About Delamero, 1880, lying face up in the frozen mud. She thought about other means. I need to get to the inn, she said. I need to think. They walked. Dorothy Seal's Inn was a narrow 2-story building at the north end of Dunbar's main street, situated between a feed store and what appeared to have been a tailor's shop at some point in its better days. A sign above the door read Seals in letters that had been repainted recently, with more care than most things in this town had received. Josiah knocked, not a casual knock. 3 beats, pause, 2 beats. The pattern of a man who had done this before, who had been let in this way before. She noticed the pattern. 3 beats, pause, 2. The knock of a man who had been let in this way before. The woman who opened the door was perhaps 65. Square-shouldered, silver hair pulled back with the practicality of someone who made that decision once, decades ago, and had not revisited it. Her face had the quality of something that had been through a great deal and had decided to keep going anyway. Not hardness, exactly. More like a kind of settled attention. The look of a woman who had seen most varieties of human trouble and had stopped being surprised by any of them. She looked at Josiah, then at Nora, then, very briefly, at the carpet bag. Her eyes stopped on the bruise forming along Nora's jaw, the one she had mostly forgotten about, in the focus of the last 20 minutes. Get inside, Dorothy said. No question, no greeting, just a decision. They got inside. The front room was warm, genuinely warm, the kind of warmth that announces itself after cold, that makes your eyes sting slightly and your fingers wake up all at once. A wood stove in the corner, 2 tables. A low ceiling that had been whitewashed at some point and was thinking about needing it again. Dorothy set a cup of coffee in front of Nora before she had fully settled into a chair. Then, a basin of warm water. Then a clean cloth. Your jaw, she said. Nora touched her face, then picked up the cloth and held it against the bruise. Thank you. Dorothy sat across from her with her own coffee and looked at her with the direct, uncomplicated assessment of a woman who had no patience left for indirection. Then she looked at Josiah. Something passed between them. Fast, quiet. The communication of people who know each other well enough to have conversations without words. Josiah pulled a map from inside his coat, set it on the table between them, and began to talk. The map was a surveyor's map, hand annotated in pencil. Josiah's handwriting, Nora could tell. Small, precise, each letter leaning slightly forward. The handwriting of someone who writes quickly because thinking moves faster than the pen. Marks along the Eastern Creek Valley. 11 of them. She counted twice. This is Rawls' operation, Josiah said. He kept his voice low and even. The way a man speaks when he's been alone with information for a long time and has learned to present it without editorializing. 2 years. He starts with legal purchase, comes in with cash money and a fair price and a friendly handshake. And most people take it, because fair prices are rare enough out here that they trust them. He paused. Let that sit. But the people who don't sell, he said, or who can't sell, because the land isn't theirs yet, or there are deed complications, or there's a widow who needs to be convinced. His finger stopped on a mark near the creek bottom east of Dunbar. Those people have accidents, he said. Or they get a letter from a correspondence agency. Nora looked at the map. At the 11 marks, how many of those are gone? She said. 8 sold outright. 2 are in dispute. His finger moved to the mark at the bottom of the valley. And 1 is yours. Nora was quiet for a moment. She was doing the arithmetic. The kind she was good at. The kind that wasn't just numbers. The kind that was people and time and what a man is willing to do. Your brother, she said. The words came out before she fully decided to say them. He looked at her. You said the man behind Clee doesn't build, she said. He builds and takes both. And you know his name and you've been in this valley 6 months. And you know the survey route and which properties are in dispute. She held his gaze. That's not just professional knowledge. That's personal. He was quiet for a moment that was a specific kind of quiet. Not hesitation. More like a man who has been carrying something alone for a long time and is considering, for the first time, whether to set it down. Rawl killed my brother, he said. 3 years ago. Dispute over 40 acres of grazing land north of Salida. Made it look like a riding accident. He stopped. One breath. The kind of breath a man takes when he's been rehearsing something for 3 years and is still not sure he can get through it. Then he continued, and his voice was completely level, entirely controlled. The levelness made it devastating, the way a flat line on a chart is worse than a falling one. The deed went missing after he died. Rawl filed a competing claim within 30 days. Nora did not look away. I've been building a legal case, he said. One the law can actually use. I have affidavits from 3 property owners. Letters connecting Rawl to Cleet in writing. A surveyor's record showing the rail company communicated with Rawl's attorney 6 months before Rawl started buying land. He looked at her steadily. What I don't have is someone willing to testify in open court. Because Rawl has the circuit judge. And people out here know what it costs to stand up against a man with unlimited patience and hired guns. Nora sat with that. The coffee was real. Strong and dark and real. She drank it. Then she said, I was a book, Josiah stilled. Before I was married, she said. 3 years. Land office in Wichita. Deeds, titles, transfer records, competing claims. She set down her cup. I know what fraudulent documentation looks like. I know how to trace a chain of title through courthouse records. She reached across the table and picked up the nearest of the affidavits he'd laid out. Read it. Fast. Set it back down. Whoever drafted this made an error in the property description, she said. Paragraph 3. He describes the parcel by landmarks instead of survey markers. In court, a defense attorney argues the description is ambiguous. The affidavit can't be attached to the specific land in dispute. The silence in the room was the kind that follows something that reorganizes the space around it. Josiah looked at her. You read that in 30 seconds, he said. 20. She looked back at the document. It's fixable. You need a corrected statement and a notary. Dorothy set down her coffee cup with a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. Well, she said mildly. Isn't that convenient? Nora looked at her. You're a notary. Have been for 14 years. Dorothy looked at Nora with the direct, measured attention of a woman who had been doing that kind of looking for a very long time. And I've been waiting for someone to sit down at that table and say what you just said. Josiah was still looking at Nora. She had learned, in the past hour, to read his face. It was not an easy face to read. The control was deep and consistent. But there was something there now, in the set of his expression, in the quality of his attention. That hadn't been there before. Not surprise, exactly. More like recognition. The expression of a man whose careful, solitary arithmetic has suddenly produced a result he did not expect and is deciding what to do with it. You're a bookkeeper, he said. I was, she said. I imagine I still am. It's not the sort of thing you forget. She looked at the map, at the 11 marks, at the annotated survey lines and the names he had written in small, precise, forward-leaning letters. Then she looked up at him. It sounds, she said, like we have something in common, Mr. Briggs. His mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Close, might be, he said. They worked for 2 hours before Nora made him tell her the rest. She didn't ask directly at first. She was correcting the affidavits, reading each one in full, noting the errors in her small, precise bookkeeper's hand on a separate sheet of paper. And the work was absorbing. The way work always was, when it was the right kind of work for the right kind of mind. 3 of the 4 documents had problems. Not fatal problems. Josiah had done better than she'd expected, for a man working alone, without legal training, but exploitable ones. The kind that an experienced attorney would drive a wagon through in front of a sympathetic judge. She fixed them in draft. made notes on the specific legal language needed for each correction. Josiah answered her questions when she asked them. Dates, names, locations, the exact sequence of events. The answers came quickly and precisely, because it turned out that a man who tracked threats in peripheral vision and noted exits in unfamiliar rooms also kept extremely organized mental records. She found herself respecting that. She found herself respecting several things about Josiah Briggs, and was noting each one with the same careful attention she gave to the documents, which was, she thought, perhaps something she should examine at a later time. When there weren't three potentially hostile men somewhere in this town and a fraudulent land scheme to unravel. At one point, around the second hour, she looked up and found him watching her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. You're staring, I'm observing, he said. There's a difference, is there? Staring is without purpose. A pause. I have a purpose. And what's that? He was quiet for a moment. A brief pause, controlled. But there. Trying to understand, he said, how a woman who spent 4 days on a stagecoach to get to a man who frightened her badly enough to have that bruise on her jaw. He stopped. Started again. Is sitting here 2 hours later, correcting legal documents by lamplight. Nora touched her jaw. She'd forgotten again. That was the third time she'd forgotten about it. She supposed that said something about the company or the work or the focus that settles in when there's something important to do. Some people fall apart, she said. Some people find the next thing to do. She looked back at the papers. I've always been the second kind. Yes, he said quietly. I can see that. She looked up again. His profile in the lamplight was all hard lines and old decisions. The scar along his jaw catching the light. The set of his shoulders carrying something she recognized. Not grief. Exactly, not anymore. But the shape that grief leaves behind when it becomes purpose. What was his name? She said. He turned his head. Your brother, she said. A pause, the wind moved against the windows. The stove ticked. Eli, he said. Eli Briggs. Another pause. He was 29. He used to say the land was the only thing left of our father. That as long as the land was in the family, our father wasn't entirely gone. Nora held that for a moment. And now his land is on your map, she said. Now his land is on my map, he said. Same pattern. Competing claim filed within 30 days of his death. Same attorney. Same notary stamp. His jaw tightened. Just slightly. The first time she'd seen visible anger from him. I've been building the case for 3 years. 6 months here. What I need, he stopped. What you needed, she said, was someone who could read the documents. He looked at her. Yes, he said. You do now, she said very quietly. He didn't answer. But when she looked up 12 minutes later, he had moved his chair slightly closer to the table, and he was reading the corrected draft over her shoulder, and his breathing was steady. And if the set of his jaw was marginally less tight than it had been an hour ago, she decided not to mention it. Dorothy appeared in the doorway at some point and set a plate of bread and cold meat on the table without comment. Eat, Dorothy said. Both of you. You look like people who forget to. Nora ate without stopping the work. Josiah ate standing upright, efficient, the habit of a man who had spent years eating alone and quickly. She watched him eat standing and said nothing about it. Dorothy sat down across from them with her own coffee and watched them work with the expression of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this and is allowing herself a very small, very private satisfaction. At one point she said, to no one in particular, the county recorder's office opens at 8. Nora looked up. We need to register the deed, she said. First thing. Before Rawls people know you're here to do it. Josiah said. Their eyes met. They already know I'm in town, Nora said. Clit will have sent word. Then we need to be at that office when it opens. He paused. The deed registered and the filing submitted before anyone has the chance to intervene. Can they intervene? Legally? Not legally, he met her eyes. But Rawl has a man in the county office, clerk. Young. Has been there 3 months and keeps track of what gets filed, he paused. I noticed about 6 weeks after he started. Took me 2 more weeks to confirm he was Rawls. Nora processed this, so anything we file, Rawl will know almost immediately, which means once we file, we have a limited time before he reacts. Yes, how limited? Hours, Josiah said, maybe less. The room was quiet for a moment. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind had picked up, pressing at the windows with the February persistence that says, "I have all night, and you do not." Nora looked at the documents in front of her. At the corrections she'd made, the legal language she'd drafted, the chain of evidence she'd been quietly constructing for the past 2 hours. She thought about hours. She thought about what you could do in hours. If you were organized and clear-eyed and not afraid of the work. Then we need to do this right the first time, she said, because we won't have a second chance. Josiah looked at her, then at the papers, then back at her. Can you have it ready by morning? He said. She was already writing. I can have it ready in an hour, she said. She finished in 50 minutes. She read it back once, then handed it to Josiah without comment and watched him read it. He read it the way he did everything, completely, without rushing, without making her feel like he was performing attention. He put it down. This is correct, he said. I know. She picked it up. I need someone else to confirm it. Why? Because when I walk into that county recorder's office tomorrow morning, she said, I need to be certain enough that it shows. She looked at him. People believe what they see. If I walk in there uncertain, they'll see uncertain. Dorothy reached across the table and took the document. Write it again. Set it down. This is correct, she said. Will you notarize it? Dorothy looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that is taking the full measure of a person and the weight of what is being asked. I'll notarize it, she said. I'll notarize every document on that table that needs it. She said it with the steadiness of a woman who understood exactly what she was putting her name to, and did not flinch, nor exhaled, just once. Short. Then she looked at Josiah. He was watching her again. With that expression she had been trying to name since the road. The one that was not assessment, not calculation, not the strategic attention of a man who needed something from her. Something else. Something that required more time than she currently had to name properly. We should rest, he said. A few hours. We'll need to be clear tomorrow. Yes, she said. Neither of them moved immediately. Outside, somewhere on the road south of Dunbar, Cleet Marrow was moving with cold purpose and a damaged wrist, and a message to deliver to a man named Edmund Rawl, and neither of them knew yet exactly what would happen next. But they knew it was coming, and they were not afraid of it. Not exactly. More like aware, the way you are aware of a storm that is not here yet, but is in the sky, in the air, in the stillness of everything that comes before something significant. Nora looked at the documents on the table, all those corrections, all that careful, precise, legally sound language. Paper, she thought. Paper doesn't get scared. Paper doesn't weigh its children against the cost. Paper in the right hands, filed in the right office, is the most patient weapon there is. She was very good with paper. And tomorrow morning, at 8 o'clock, she was going to walk into the Cutter County Recorder's office and show Edmund Rawl exactly what that meant. She was not afraid. She was ready. She slept 4 hours, not because she was calm, because her body made the decision without consulting her. One moment she was sitting on the edge of the narrow bed in Dorothy's back room, still in her traveling coat, still holding the corrected affidavit. The next moment it was dark outside, and someone had put a blanket over her, and the lamp was turned low. She lay there for a moment, listened. Wind. The stove in the front room. The creak of a building that has been standing in Colorado winters, long enough to have opinions about it. Nothing wrong. Nothing immediate. She sat up. The affidavit was still in her hand. She had not let go of it even in sleep, which said something about her. She wasn't sure what. Something she would think about later, when there was time for that kind of reflection, which was not now. Now was for work. She smoothed the document. Read it again in the dim light, the way you read something important. Not for information, you already know the information, but for confidence. For the certainty that comes from knowing a thing is right before you have to defend it. In a room full of people who would prefer it weren't. It was right. She knew it was right. She stood up and went to find Josiah. He was at the table. Of course he was at the table. It was 4 in the morning, and he was sitting at Dorothy's kitchen table with the map and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, based on the way he was not drinking it, and he had a second set of documents laid out that she hadn't seen before. He looked up when she came in. Didn't comment on the fact that she was still in her traveling coat. She didn't comment on the cold coffee. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "There's something in your father's deed," he said, "that I should have caught sooner." She looked at the table. He had her father's deed unfolded between 2 other documents. A surveyor's map that was different from his annotated one, more official, with the railroad company's letterhead in the corner, and a date stamp from the previous October, and a hand-written letter that she didn't recognize. The original deed, he said, includes a hydrological survey, standard practice in Colorado Territory land grants after 1875. Your father's attorney filed it with the original claim, he pointed. Here, Nora leaned forward. There it was. A drawing, small, precise. The kind of technical illustration that a surveyor makes when documenting water sources, with notations in a hand that was not her father's and symbols she recognized from land office work, an underground spring, running directly beneath the eastern portion of the 40 acres, fed from snowmelt off the Sangre de Cristo range. Consistent volume. Year-round, she looked at it. Then she looked at the railroad survey. At the route line. At the specific point where the route crossed the Eastern Creek Valley. Then she looked up at Josiah. He was watching her do the math. The engines need water, she said, every 30 miles. He said. Roughly, depending on grade and load, and there's no other source. The nearest reliable water source east of Dunbar is 14 miles beyond your property line. He paused. I checked. Last month. Because I kept wondering why Rawl was so determined about the Creek Valley property specifically, when there's cheaper land north of here. Nora looked at the map again. At the route. At the 40 acres. At the little hydrological notation that her father's surveyor had made, probably 15 years ago, probably without any idea that one day it would be the reason someone sent a stack of fraudulent letters to a widow in Missouri. It's not about the land, she said. No, Josiah said. It's about the water. The land is just what the water sits underneath. Without this property, the route stalls. They'd need to reroute or build a water tank operation from scratch. Adds time. Adds money. He looked at the map. Rawl knew because he got the survey results before anyone else did, 6 months before he started buying. I have the letter. He pointed to the handwritten document at the edge of the table, from the railroad's land agent to Rawl's attorney. Dated March 1882, Nora picked up the letter. Write it, sit down. Dear Mr. Fenwick, regarding the hydrological assessments for the proposed Cutter County route, she looked at Josiah. This is evidence, she said. Yes, this alone would support a fraud claim. If the deed is registered first, he said. If your property rights are established before Rawl can contest the chain of title. He met her eyes. Which is why 8 o'clock this morning matters. She looked at the clock on Dorothy's wall. 5:47, 2 hours and 13 minutes. Then let's use the time, she said. They used it. Nora reorganized the filing sequence. Not just the deed registration, but the challenge documentation, arranged in the order that would be most difficult for a county recorder to refuse. She knew how county offices worked. She had spent 3 years in one. She knew the specific weight of a well-organized legal filing, dropped on a desk by someone who clearly knows what they're doing and is waiting, pleasantly, for the appropriate stamp. Josiah filled in the gaps she needed. Dates, specific events, the full names of the people on his map. He answered without consulting notes, which meant he carried it all in his head, which meant he had been living with this information for 3 years. and it had become part of him the way things do when they matter that much. Dorothy appeared at 6 and put eggs and bread on the table without comment. She ate standing up. Josiah ate standing up. Nora was the only one who sat. Because she was writing. "You both eat standing," she said, without looking up from the document. "Habit," Josiah said. "From being alone," she said. He didn't answer. Which was, she had learned, its own kind of answer. Dorothy caught her eye across the table, said nothing. But the slight adjustment of her expression said, "Yes, that's right, and you noticed it. And I noticed that you noticed it. And we will not discuss this right now, but perhaps later." Nora went back at 7:15. She set down her pen and read the complete filing package aloud. Every document. Every correction. The deed registration, the fraud challenge, the supporting affidavit, the roads, the railroad letter. Dorothy Shaw listened. When she finished, neither of them spoke immediately. Then Dorothy said, "That will hold." Then Josiah said, "Yes." Neither of them said "good job" or "well done" or anything that would have sounded like condescension. They just said what they meant, plainly, and Nora felt the accuracy of it land in her chest, like the first real warmth she'd felt since the stagecoach. "I'll get my stamp," Dorothy said, and left the room. Josiah checked the loads in his revolver. Kia, practiced. The efficiency of a man who has done this so many times that it has become a form of thinking rather than an action. Nora watched him do it, felt something that was not quite fear. Not quite. More like the awareness of stakes. Of what was real and what it cost. "You don't have to come in," she said. He looked at her. "The filing is a legal action," she said. "It doesn't require." "I know what it requires," he said. "I'm coming." She looked at him for a moment. At the gray eyes and the controlled face, and the scar that had been there long enough to be part of the landscape. "All right," she said. Dorothy came back with her stamp. And at 7:53, on a February morning in 1883, Nora Vane picked up her carpet bag, tucked the oilskin-wrapped documents against her body beneath her coat, and walked out the front door of Dorothy Seals Inn into the cold. The Cutter County Recorder's Office was a single-story building on the east side of Main Street. Brick. Solid. The kind of government building that says, "Permanence is the point." A flag above the door that had been through several winters and was working on a few more. 2 minutes to 8, Nora walked at the same pace she always walked. Direct, even, not fast enough to look urgent, not slow enough to look uncertain. Behind her, she was aware of Josiah, slightly to her left. Not crowding, just present. The way a mountain is present. You don't choose whether to acknowledge it. You simply become aware of it and adjust. She also became aware, at the corner nearest the building, of a man she hadn't seen before, dark coat, positioned facing the door. The deliberate positioning of someone who is not waiting for the office to open, but is watching for who does. She did not change her pace. She walked through the door. The recorder's office smelled of paper and stove black and the staleness of a room where important things happened in a small space. The recorder himself was behind the main counter, 50-something, balding. The professionally careful neutrality of a man who had spent decades serving public institutions and had learned to have no visible opinions about the people who walked through his door. His name placard read, Horace Blevins, County Recorder. Behind him, at a secondary desk set slightly to the right, a young man of perhaps 22 was arranging papers with the focused attention of someone who is pretending to arrange papers. Nora had seen that kind of focused attention before, in the Wichita Land Office. When someone was waiting to see what came in, she walked to the main counter. "Good morning," she said pleasantly. "I'd like to register a deed, and I'll need access to the public land transfer records for Cutter County." The past 24 months, Blevins looked at her, then at Josiah, who had positioned himself 4 feet behind her and slightly to the left, not threatening, just present, just the simple, undeniable fact of himself. "The records access will take a moment to." "Of course," Nora said. We can start with the deed registration while you pull them." She set the deed on the counter. Blevins looked at it. Property description. Her father's name. The chain of title. The surveyor's notation. His eyes made one small involuntary movement toward the young man at the secondary desk. Fast. Barely there. Nora caught it. Of course she caught it. "Is there a problem with the document?" she said. "No, ma'am," Blevins said carefully. "It appears to be in order. Then I'll need today's date stamp and an entry in the fish register," she said. "While you do that, I'll begin with the transfer records." Blevins hesitated. "One beat. 2. The records are public," she said, pleasantly firmly, the exact tone of a woman who knows the law on this particular point and is not asking for an opinion about it. "Under Colorado territorial statute, any citizen may access deed records filed with this office. I'm sure you're aware of that, Mr. Blevins." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and he stamped the deed. Nora felt something release in her chest. Something she had been holding without fully knowing it since Missouri. Since the first letter from Clete Merrow arrived. And she had understood, somewhere beneath the hope that this might go wrong. The deed was registered. Whatever happened next, that part was done. She turned to the record shelf. The young man at the secondary desk was on his feet. "Ma'am, the records require a formal." "They're public records," she said, already moving. "I don't need formal permission to review public records." She looked at him directly for the first time. He was young, maybe 22. The slightly off-balance quality of a man doing something he knows is wrong and has found reasons to continue. "You're welcome to stand there," she told him. "Or you're welcome to sit back down and do your work." He looked past her at Josiah. Josiah looked back at him, the same way he'd looked at Clete Merrow's men on the road outside of town, without urgency, without display, with the simple, complete fact of himself. The young man sat down. Nora pulled the land transfer files for the past 24 months and began to read. She worked fast. She had always worked fast. Her supervisor at the Wichita Land Office used to say she read documents the way other people read faces, the meaning arriving whole rather than letter by letter. Property descriptions, transfer dates, notary stamps, witness signatures, the chain of title for each of the 11 properties on Josiah's map. She moved through them in order, making notes in her small, precise hand, cross-referencing dates against the timeline Josiah had given her the night before. The young man at the secondary desk had stopped pretending to work. He was watching her, trying to look like he wasn't. Failing. She did not look back at him. 15 minutes in, she stopped. "Read the passage again. Write it a third time." Then she said quietly, "Josiah." He was at her side in 2 steps. She pointed to a document without touching it. "This transfer record. The Hendry parcel. Look at the notary stamp." He looked. "What am I seeing?" "The stamp date is October 9th, she said. "The witness signature is dated October 11th. She pulled another file, laid it beside the first. "Now look at this. The notary's own registration record with the county. The stamp she used was issued October 17th. She let that sit for exactly the time it needed. A notary," she said, her voice completely level, "used a stamp that didn't exist yet to certify a transfer that happened before the stamp was issued. Which means the transfer date was backdated." She looked up at him. "Rawl filed this claim before he legally could, and the notary either didn't notice or didn't care." Josiah's jaw tightened. "It gets better," she said. She was already pulling the next file. "This witness signature. The same name appears on 6 separate documents. 6 different properties, 5 different dates, 3 of which overlap." She held the pages beside each other. "This man apparently witnessed 5 simultaneous property transfers while being in 3 different locations." "That's not possible," Josiah said. "No," Nora said. "It is not." She set the pages down with the controlled precision of a woman who is very angry and has chosen to express that anger through accuracy. "What it is," she said, "is fraud. Systematic. Documented. The kind that a territorial court cannot ignore when it is laid out this clearly. In the county's own official records, Blevins had stopped moving. The young man at the secondary desk was very still. Nora looked at Blevins. "Mr. Blevins," she said, "I need to formally file a title challenge for all 11 properties on the Raw acquisition list, citing fraud in the deed transfer process. I have the documentation here." She reached into the oilskin package and produced the challenge document Dorothy had notarized that morning. "I also need this office to preserve these deed records, exactly as they are. They constitute evidence in a fraud proceeding." She set the document on the counter. "I'll wait while you enter it." Blevins looked at the document, looked at the young man behind him, looked at Josiah, looked at the stamp in his hand, and then the door opened. She heard it before she turned, the sound of a door opening with too much purpose behind it. Edmund Rawle was not what she had expected. She had built a picture of him from Josiah's descriptions and the nature of what he'd done. A large man, hard-faced, the kind of obvious threat that announces itself. What walked through the door of the Cutter County Recorder's office was a man of about 50, medium height, silver-haired, well-dressed in the way that communicates money without announcing it. A pleasant face, friendly eyes. The practiced warmth of a man who had gotten very far in life by seeming reasonable. Behind him, 2 men who were not dressed well and were not trying to seem reasonable. Rawle looked at the documents on the counter, looked at Nora, looked at Josiah. His pleasant face did not change, which told Nora more about him than any expression would have. "Mrs. Vane," he said. He had clearly done his research overnight. "I believe we have some things to discuss." "I believe everything I have to say," Nora said, "is already in that filing on the counter." Rawle moved toward the counter with the ease of a man who had walked into rooms and owned them for 30 years. "You've been given some information that's unfortunately incomplete. I'd be very glad to sit down with you and explain the actual history of these transfers. I think you'll find there are perfectly reasonable explanations." "I'm sure you'd find them reasonable," she said. 11 instances of backdated notary stamps tend to look reasonable to the person who ordered the backdating. The pleasant face held. "That's a serious accusation." "It's in the filing," she said. With documentation attached, he looked at Blevins. Something passed between them. Fast. "The communication of a man accustomed to owning the people in a room. Horace," Rawle said. "I think we might want to hold off on processing that filing until Mr. Blevins." Josiah's voice, Darrell stopped speaking. Josiah had not moved from where he stood. He was not reaching for his weapon. He simply looked at Horace Blevins with the direct, clear attention of a man asking a question that has only one right answer. "That filing was submitted lawfully by a citizen of this territory," Josiah said. "Do you intend to process it?" The room was very quiet. Blevins looked at Rawle, looked at Josiah, looked at the document on his counter, and Nora watched the man's face go through something complicated. The arithmetic of 40 years spent in a public office doing things correctly. Because doing things correctly had been the only thing he was ever completely certain of. "Yes," Blevins said quietly. "I do." He stamped the filing. Alt's pleasant face underwent its first genuine change. Not rage. Not fear. Something colder than both. The expression of a man who is revising his plans in real time, and who has just understood, for the first time, that the woman standing across the counter from him is not an obstacle. She is an opponent. He looked at Nora with new attention. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "You made it exactly this hard," she said. "The day you sent Cleet Marrow to Missouri with a stack of false letters and my father's deed on his shopping list." She held his gaze. "Those 2 men behind you can stand there all morning. What's in that filing is already stamped and entered. The records I've identified as fraudulent are now evidence in a legal proceeding. You can't unfind what's been found." Rawle looked at her for a long moment. "I know judges in this territory," he said. "I know how long a challenge proceeding takes, and what it costs, and how many people run out of money and patience before the case concludes." "I know those things too," Nora said. What I also know is that a fraudulent notary stamp in an official county record is a criminal matter, not civil. And the U.S. Marshal's Office has jurisdiction that your county connections do not. Something moved across Rawls' face. Fast. Gone. I'll be writing to the Marshal's office in Pueblo today, Nora said. With certified copies of every document Mr. Blevins has just entered into the official record, she paused one beat. I learned to make certified copies in Wichita, Mr. Rawl. I'm very good at it. Rawls' two men shifted toward Josiah, not Nora. The reflexive attention of men who categorize threats by size and visible weapons don't. Josiah said one word, the same tone, the absolute certainty that had stopped Cleet Marrow on a frozen road that morning. The two men went still. Rossall looked at his men, looked at Josiah, looked at Nora, and then Edmund Rawl, who had spent 2 years and a considerable fortune building something he believed was untouchable, turned and walked out of the Cutter County Recorder's office. Pleasant face restored. Steady gait. The walk of a man who does not let you see him break. He just recalculates. Nora knew that. She watched him go and felt no relief at all. Because she understood now, more clearly than she had this morning, exactly what she was dealing with. This was not an ending. It was a declaration. She turned to Blevins. I need certified copies, please. Now, Blevins, whose hands were not entirely steady, began making certified copies. Outside, the cold hit like a wall. Josiah came to stand beside her on the boardwalk. He's going to come back harder, she said. Yes, tonight. Probably before those letters reach Pueblo. Yes, so we need to send them today. She looked at him. Dorothy. You mentioned she has a writer she trusts. I asked her this morning, he said. While you were finishing the documents. Nora looked at him. He had been thinking 3 steps ahead. Arranging the pieces before she asked for them. Not because he doubted her. Because he had decided to be useful in the specific ways she hadn't covered yet. She held that. In the place where she kept things that mattered. We're not done, she said. No, he agreed. We're not. Dorothy's writer left for Pueblo at 10 that morning. Certified copies wrapped in oilskin, tucked inside his coat. Strict instructions to hand them only to Marshal Eldon Pruitt himself. Nora watched him go from the back window of the inn. She felt the anxiety of a person who has just committed to something irreversible. The letters were moving. Whatever happened now, that could not be undone. She turned from the window. Josiah was at the table. Map out again. Different posture now, not the careful, contained posture of someone presenting information. The posture of someone calculating threat. His writer is faster than ours, Josiah said. I know. Rawl will have sent someone to Pueblo too. To the judge he has there. To slow down the marshal's response. How slow? Josiah was quiet for a moment. Best case. Pruitt arrives tomorrow morning. If Rawl's people slow him, tomorrow afternoon. Maybe later, and between now and then, Josiah said, Rawl moves. Nora sat down at the table, poured her own coffee, thought. He can't kill me, she said. Not now. The filing is stamped. The records are evidence. The certified copies are moving toward Pueblo. Killing me makes everything worse for him. Yes, Josiah said. So he won't try to kill you. He'll try to discredit me. Or frighten me into withdrawing the challenge, or both. Or both. She looked at the map, at the 11 marks, at the annotated survey line running through the Eastern Creek Valley. He'll send someone tonight, Cleet, Josiah said. And whoever else he has that I haven't identified. How many is that? At least 2 I don't have names for. He paused. Possibly 3. Nora considered this. The cabin, she said. Does Rawl know about it? The location is known to Dorothy and Father McRae. That's all. Then we should work from there tonight. She looked at him. If they come for us here, Dorothy is in the middle of it. She's already in the middle of it, Josiah said. Has been since I showed up at her back door 6 months ago. That doesn't mean we should make it worse. Nora stood. What time does it get dark? 5, maybe 5:30 this time of year. She looked at the clock. We have time. Is there anything else in those records I should see before we leave? He looked at her. Yes, he said, there is. They went back. Blevins let them in without comment. He looked like a man who had made a decision that morning and was now living inside it, and had not yet decided whether to be relieved or frightened, probably both. The young man at the secondary desk was gone, Nora noticed. Did not say anything yet. She went back to the records. The files she hadn't finished, the ones she had set aside when Rawl walked in. Josiah watched the door. She read 20 minutes, 30, and then she found it. Not a document error this time. Something else. Something larger. She read it again, slowly, the way you read something when you need to be absolutely certain before you say it out loud. Then she looked at the dates. Then at the names. Then she set the document down very carefully, the way you set down something that has just changed the shape of everything you understood an hour ago. Josiah, she said. He came to her side. She pointed. He read. She watched him understand it, watched the controlled face go through the same process hers had just gone through. The reading, the reading, the settling of it into something that could not be unsettled. The transfers, she said. The ones to Rawl. They were processed through a holding company. She tapped the document. Fenwick Land Holdings. Rawl's attorney's company. Which means Rawl himself is not on the deed records. He insulated himself, Josiah said, completely. From a legal standpoint, Rawl doesn't own anything. Fenwick Land Holdings owns it. Which means even if we prove the transfers were fraudulent, Rawl walks away clean, Josiah said, and Fenwick takes the liability, unless, Nora said, we can prove Rawl and Fenwick are the same operation, which means finding the financial connection, bank records, correspondence, something that shows Fenwick acts on Rawl's instructions. I have correspondence, Josiah said slowly, the railroad letter. But it's addressed to Fenwick, which connects Fenwick to the railroad. But not to Rawl directly, she thought. Who is Fenwick? Thomas Fenwick. Attorney. Denver office. Has he been to Dunbar? 3 times that I know of. Filed the original competing claims in person. Josiah paused. The last time was 4 months ago. 4 months ago, Nora looked at the dates on the filing documents. 4 months ago, she said, is when the last 3 transfers were completed. She pulled those files, looked at the notary stamps. 1 name, 1 stamp. On all 3 documents, she looked at the name. Then she looked at Josiah. Dorothy, she said. He went very still. Before she was an independent notary, Nora said carefully. Before she set up her own practice. Was she ever connected to a law firm? Long silence. I don't know, Josiah said. We need to ask her. We need to ask her carefully. Yes, Nora said. We do. They asked her. Dorothy listened to the question. All the way through. Without interrupting. Without looking away. Then she was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen was warm. The stove was going. Outside, the wind had picked up again, the way it does in Colorado when the afternoon turns the corner toward evening, and the temperature remembers what it's supposed to be doing. Thomas Fenwick, Dorothy said finally. Yes, Nora said. Another silence. Shorter. I notarized 3 documents for him, Dorothy said. 14 months ago. He came here directly. Said they were standard land transfers. Showed me the paperwork. She paused. I stamped them. Did you read them? Nora said. I read the descriptions. Dorothy's jaw tightened. I did not read them the way you read them. I didn't know what to look for. Nora held her gaze. When did you understand what you had stamped? Long pause. 8 months ago, Dorothy said. When the Sutter family sold. They didn't want to sell. They came to me and asked if there was anything I could do, and I pulled my own copies of what I'd notarized for Fenwick. She looked at her hands, and I read them the way I should have read them the first time. The room was very quiet. I've been waiting, Dorothy said, for someone to come who could do something about it. She looked at Nora directly. I kept the copies. Everyone. They're upstairs. Nora looked at Josiah. He looked back at her. Not surprise. Not accusation. Just the quiet recalibration of 2 people who have just received information that changes the map and are deciding together how to move forward on new terrain. We need those copies, Nora said. Tonight, I know, Dorothy said. I'll get them. She stood, started toward the stairs, then stopped. Nora, she said without turning around. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't find a way to act sooner. Nora looked at the woman's back, at the silver hair and the square shoulders, and the posture of someone carrying something they've been carrying for a long time. You kept the copies, Nora said. For 8 months. Alone. That was an act of courage, even if it didn't feel like one. Dorothy stood there for a moment. Then she went upstairs. Josiah looked at Nora. You believe her, he said. Yes, she said. Why? Because she kept the copies. Nora said. A person who is simply protecting themselves destroys the evidence. A person keeping it is holding it for a reason. He thought about that. Yes, he said. All right. Dorothy came back with a small tin box. Inside, 3 documents. Carbon copies, carefully preserved between sheets of clean paper. Nora read them in 7 minutes. Then she sat back. These connect Fenwick directly to the fraudulent transfers, she said. And these, she pointed to the witness signatures on Dorothy's copies. These have a notary stamp date that doesn't match the event dates. The same error, Josiah said. The same error. Different documents. Which means it's a pattern, not a mistake. She looked up. A defense attorney could argue one backdated stamp is clerical error. Not 4. Not across 11 properties over 2 years. It's the pattern that matters. Josiah said, It's always the pattern, she said. Individual anomalies are explainable. Patterns are prosecutable, she began to organize. The deed challenge documents. The certified copies filed that morning. Dorothy's tin box, the railroad letter. The affidavits Josiah had been building for 3 years. 1 stack. Organized by chronology. Annotated in her small, forward-leaning hand. She worked for an hour. Josiah made coffee. Actual coffee. Real and hot and strong. She drank it without looking up. At some point, he set a plate beside her. She ate without stopping the work. The light outside went from afternoon to the deep blue of Colorado at altitude in February. The color that means the temperature is about to make a decision and act on it. We need to move soon, Josiah said. 10 more minutes, Nora. She looked up. He was at the window. Not alarmed, not yet, but his posture had shifted. That quality of attentiveness she had learned to read in the past 24 hours. When he went still in that specific way, something was happening at the edges. How many, she said? 2 riders. South end of Main Street. Moving slow. Looking at buildings, she understood immediately. Not approaching. Mapping. Learning where things were. Learning where she was. Rawl, she said. Clet? Most likely. Doing the reconnaissance himself. He turned from the window. We have maybe 30 minutes before they're confident enough to move. Nora looked at the documents. At the stack she had built, she scooped them up, wrapped them in the oilskin. Tucked them inside her coat. The cabin, she said. Yes, Dorothy. I'm not staying here, Dorothy said. She was already at the door, coat on, tin box under her arm. Don't argue with me. I'm 65 years old and I've been waiting 8 months for this. I'm coming. Josiah looked at her, then at Nora. Nora looked at Dorothy. At the set jaw and the direct eyes and the posture of a woman who had made her decision well before this moment and was simply executing it. Father McCrae, Nora said. Can he get word to the families? The ones on Josiah's map tonight? Dorothy considered for exactly 2 seconds. Yes, then tell him we need them. Tomorrow morning. At the church, she looked at Josiah. Before the marshal arrives, Rawl will know. Yes, Nora said. He'll know. He'll try to stop it. She picked up her carpet bag. Let him try. They left through the back. The alley behind the feed store, keeping to shadows. Moving at the pace of people who have somewhere to be and are not running. Because running attracts attention, and attention is the one thing they cannot afford. Nora kept the oilskin pressed against her side beneath her coat, her right hand over it. Just touch. Just the constant grounding reassurance that it was there. All that paper, all those dates and names and fraudulent stamps. 2 years of Rawl's careful machinery. 3 years of Josiah's careful case building. And now Dorothy's copies. The pattern made visible. The thing that connected everything. She felt walking through that alley, like she was carrying something that had been waiting for her. That all of it, her father's deed, her 3 years in the land office, the letters and the stagecoach and the frozen road and Josiah, stepping out of the tree line, had been moving toward this specific moment for longer than she could account for. That thought was too large for the alley. She set it aside. Later, the cabin was a mile east of town, off the main road, up a slope that looked solid rock, and was mostly solid rock except for a narrow trail along the north face that you had to already know about. Josiah led, Dorothy followed without complaint. Nora came last, and she did not fall, and she did not drop the bag. The cabin was small, dark, cold in the way of a space that's been closed for weeks. Josiah had it warm in 15 minutes, not comfortable warm, but warm enough that your body stops arguing with you about whether survival is worth the effort. Nora sat at the table, opened the oilskin, spread the documents, and then the sound came. From the north slope, multiple horses, moving carefully, too carefully, the movement of people who know roughly where they're going. Josiah was on his feet before Nora had fully processed the sound. "How many?" she said. "3, maybe 4. How do they know about this place?" "They don't," he said. "Not exactly. But if Cleet had someone watching Dorothy's back entrance, he was already moving. They followed us to the road. From there, it's not hard to narrow down. The documents. Take them. Back window. There's a drop about 4 feet. Move straight east to the creek. Follow it north. Don't use the trail. And you? Right behind you," he said. "Go." She went. She pushed the window, got her legs over the sill, dropped, landed on frozen rock. Her knee hit hard. She did not make a sound. She stood and moved east. Behind her, the door. Voices. Rough, urgent male. Then a gunshot that stopped her heart for 2 full seconds. Then silence. Then footsteps, running. His footsteps. She already knew the weight of them. "Keep moving," Josiah said from behind her. She kept moving. They ran along the creek for 20 minutes. In the dark, in the cold. Nora did not fall. She did not drop the bag. She did not ask the questions stacking up in her mind, because she had learned enough about Josiah Briggs in the past 24 hours to know that the time for questions was not right now. Right now was for movement. She ran. Josiah was keeping pace beside her now. She could hear his breathing, even and controlled, with something beneath it that wasn't quite right. A quality to it that was working harder than usual. "Josiah, keep moving. I'm fine. Keep moving." She kept moving, but she heard it in his breathing, the thing he wasn't saying. They reached the north edge of Dunbar just before midnight. Dorothy was already there. She was standing at the back door of a building Nora recognized after a moment as the church, because of course Dorothy knew a different route. The church door opened from inside before anyone knocked. Father Arden McCrae was a lean man of perhaps 60, with the direct eyes of someone who assessed character quickly. Because his profession had always required it, he looked at all 3 of them, took in the quality of the situation with what Nora suspected was long practice at reading groups of people arriving at his door in various states of urgency. He stepped back. "Come in," he said. "I'll put water on." Nora stepped into the warmth of the church's back room and stopped. Josiah had come in behind her. She heard him set something down, his hand against the doorframe, catching himself. She turned. He was standing in the doorway, with his left hand against the frame, and his right arm held in a particular way. The way of a man who is controlling pain, without wanting anyone to know it, and is slightly less successful at this than he would prefer. His coat sleeve. Dark on the right side, just below the shoulder, darker than the rest. "Josiah," she said. "I'm fine. You were shot." "Grazed," he said. "There's a difference, is there? It's significant." "Sit down," she said. "I need to watch the..." "Sit down." He sat down, slowly, with the dignity of a man who is in more pain than he is willing to admit and is maintaining the performance of being fine, through sheer force of will. Father McCrae appeared with water and cloth, and a look on his face that said he had done this before too. Nora set down the oilskin package, looked at it, looked at Josiah, at Dorothy, who met her eyes with that direct, settled attention, at Father McCrae, who was already beginning to address the wound with the quiet competence of a man who ministered to injured in a frontier town for a long time. "Father," Nora said, "yes, we need the families on Josiah's list tomorrow morning, before 9 o'clock. Here," she paused. "Can you do that tonight?" He looked at her, then at Josiah, then back at her. "Yes," he said, "I can do that. It will put you in Rawl's way. Rawl has been in my way for 2 years, Father McCrae said mildly. "I've been waiting for someone to get in his." He tied off the bandage, looked at Josiah. "That's clean. It needs to be cleaned properly in the morning. Try not to be shot again in the meantime. That's the plan," Josiah said, with approximately none of the humor the delivery attempted. Dorothy sat down at the table, opened the tin box, set the documents out. "Then let's finish what we started," she said. Nora looked at her, then at the documents, then at Josiah, who was sitting across from her, with a bandaged shoulder and gray eyes that were still paying attention, still watching, still entirely present in the way he always was. As if being shot was simply a variable he had accounted for, and was not interested in treating as an obstacle. She sat down, picked up her pen, and got back to work. She worked until 3 in the morning, by lamplight, in a church back room, with a bandaged man across the table and an old woman with a tin box of evidence and a priest who came and went quietly, getting messages to 11 families at midnight in February without making a sound. She worked. And in the working, she thought about something Josiah had said on the road that morning. "You were the most interesting thing on it." She had almost stopped walking when he said it. She still thought about it now. Not because it was flattering, though it was, but because of what it meant about the quality of attention that produced it. A man who watched a road and found her. Not her appearance, not her situation, her. The way she moved, the way she thought, the way she kept her eyes moving without moving her head. That was an unusual thing to see. And she worked. Because the families were coming at 5 in the morning, because Rawl was somewhere in Dunbar revising his plans, because the marshal was somewhere between here and Pueblo riding through the dark, because all of it, the deed and the water, and the fraudulent stamps, and Josiah's dead brother, and Dorothy's tin box and the 11 marks on the map, all of it was moving towards something, and it was going to matter. It was going to have to. She did not sleep, not because she was afraid. She had moved, past afraid somewhere around the 2nd hour of working by lamplight in a church back room, with a bandaged man across the table and a tin box, full of evidence that could dismantle 2 years of carefully constructed fraud. Fear requires uncertainty, and Nora Vane had run out of uncertainty. What she had instead was clarity. The cold clarity that comes when you have looked at every document, traced every chain of title, identified every fraudulent stamp, and understood completely what you are dealing with and what needs to happen next. She knew what needed to happen. She just needed the morning to get here. So she sat at the table, and she worked. And when there was no more work to do, she read what she had done. Checked it again. The way you check a column of figures you already know is correct. Not because you doubt the math, but because the stakes are high enough that certainty is worth the extra time. Everything held. Josiah dozed in the chair by the door. Not deeply. The light sleep of a man who has trained himself to be useful on short rest. His right shoulder was bandaged. His breathing was even. But she noticed occasionally the small adjustments he made, the way he shifted his weight, the brief tightening around his eyes, that told her the wound was speaking to him whether he was listening or not. She looked at him when she thought he couldn't see her doing it, which was perhaps more often than was strictly necessary. Dorothy sat across the table from Thora, awake, upright, drinking her 4th cup of coffee, with the air of a woman for whom sleep had become optional somewhere around her 50th year, and she had made her peace with it. At 4 in the morning, Dorothy said, "You love the work." Nora looked up. "I beg your pardon?" The documents, the filing. The way you organize a legal argument. Dorothy held her cup. You love it. Your face does something different when you're doing it. Nora considered this. I find it satisfying. When things are in the right order. That's what I said. Father McRae came in from outside at 4:30 with cold on his coat and a specific quality of exhaustion. That means someone has been walking quickly in the dark between several houses and has not stopped for anything. 11 families, he said. 14 adults who have been affected by Rawls' acquisitions. They'll come at 5, not 7. He poured himself coffee with the efficiency of a man running on purpose. I told them 5 because by 7 Rawl will be watching the church. Josiah opened his eyes. Good thinking, he said. I've had 2 years to think about it, Father McRae said simply. They came in 1s and 2s, starting at 5:10, through the side door that opened onto the alley. Quietly. The way people move when they have learned that visible things become targets, Nora watched them come in. A man of perhaps 50 with the weathered face and set jaw of someone who has been holding something back for a long time. A woman in her 40s with her hands clasped together, the knuckles white. An older couple, side by side, who looked at the space around them with the careful attention of people who had stopped trusting that spaces were safe. By 5:45, 14 people were seated in the church pews, not speaking much. The quiet of people who have arrived somewhere they were not sure they were allowed to go, for something they were not sure they were allowed to want. Nora stood at the front, not behind the pulpit. That was Father McRae's space. Just in the front, in the aisle, at the same level as everyone else. She looked at them, they looked at her, and she thought, these are the people Rawl built his machinery on top of. These are the people he decided could be moved, could be pressured, could be managed. She thought about what a bookkeeper knows that a man like Rawl never learns. Numbers don't lie. And people, when you show them the numbers clearly, do not look away. My name is Nora Vane, she said. I came to Colorado from Missouri 4 days ago, under a fraudulent marriage arrangement, organized by a man named Edmund Rawl to acquire my father's land deed through me. She paused, let it settle. 2 days ago, I filed a formal title challenge at the county recorder's office, citing documented fraud in the deed transfer process for 11 properties in Cutter County. She held up the challenge document. I found that fraud in the official county records, which are public documents, which any of you could have accessed. The woman with clasped hands said, They told us the papers were legal. The papers were not legal. Nora said, I can show you specifically how. If you want to see, we want to see, said the man with the set jaw. Quickly, like he'd been waiting to say it, so she showed them. She walked them through it. The backdated notary stamp. The witness signature that appeared in 3 places simultaneously. The chain of title that broke when you looked at it closely. The railroad letter that connected Fenwick Land Holdings, and through Fenwick, Rawl himself, to prior knowledge of the survey route. She did not simplify it. These were not people who needed simplification. These were people who had worked land and kept records and understood that the difference between what a document says and what it means is the difference between having something and losing it. They understood every word. The man with the set jaw. His name was Garrett, she would learn later, and his brother had owned the Henry parcel before the transfer that shouldn't have been possible, was on his feet before she finished. My brother's land, he said. That was his land. He built that fence line himself. He dug that well with his own hands, I know, Nora said. His transfer record is one of the 11. The notary stamp dates don't match. The witness signatures can't be verified. The chain of title has a gap in it that a territorial court cannot overlook. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat back down, not defeated. Something else. Something that looked like a man who has been told something true after a long time of being told things that weren't. The woman with clasped hands. Her name was Ida Marsh, and her husband had sold their eastern pasture under what she would describe, quietly, to Nora later, as pressure she didn't have words for at the time raised her eyes. "We thought there was nothing to be done. There was nothing to be done alone," Nora said. "That's different from there being nothing." Ida Marsh looked at her for a long moment, then she nodded, once. The kind of nod that means, "I heard that. I am keeping it." The church door opened at 6:15. Nora heard it before she turned. Clet Marrow, two men she hadn't seen before. Not the ones from the road, different ones. Rawl had more than she had calculated. Recalculate now. Cleet looked different than he had on the road outside of town. Not less dangerous, differently dangerous. The kind of dangerous that has had time to get cold and deliberate about itself. His wrist was wrapped. He held his right hand with the slight stiffness of something that still hurt. Because old habits. He looked at the 14 people in the pews. He looked at Nora. He looked past her briefly at Josiah, who was standing to the left of the front pew with his bandaged shoulder and his gray eyes and the complete, settled, immovable quality of his presence. Then back at Nora. His two men were looking at Josiah. The way men do when they are categorizing threats by size. When they have decided where the danger lives. They were wrong about where the danger lived. But she would let them figure that out. "Mrs. Vane," Cleet said. "The use of the title not courtesy?" "Something else, Mr. Marrow," she said. "Mr. Rawl would like to offer." "No," she said. He stopped. "Just one word. Clean. Immediate. You might want to hear the—" "No," she said again. Same tone. Same weight. Whatever he's offering, the answer is no. Whatever he's threatening, the answer is still no. The filing is stamped. The records are entered. The certified copies are already with the marshal. She looked at him directly. "There is nothing you can say in this building that changes any of those facts." Facts. Something moved in Cleet's face. "You're being very confident for someone in a difficult position," he said. "I'm being accurate," she said. There's a difference. His two men had not moved, but they had shifted the weight of their attention, away from Josiah, toward the room, toward the 14 people sitting in the pews, who were watching this exchange with the focused, alert quiet of people who had been waiting for something like this for a long time and were not going to look away. One of Cleet's men said something quietly to the other. The other one looked at the room, at Garrett's set jaw, at Ida Marsh's clasped hands, at the older couple by the window who were looking at Cleet Marrow with 40 years of accumulated quiet recognition. The first man turned and walked back out the door. The second one followed him. Just like that, Cleet turned, looked at the empty space where his men had been, then back at the room. And something shifted in him, not collapse, something smaller and more significant. The shift of a man who has been holding a shape that no longer fits. "Rawl promised you a percentage," Nora said, quietly. "Not for the room, just for him." He looked at her. "He didn't put it in writing," she said. "Did he?" Silence. "Men like Rawl don't put verbal promises in writing," she said, "because the promise is the tool. Once it's served its purpose, it disappears." She held his gaze. "You were never a partner, Mr. Marrow. You were a means to an end. The same as the letters, the same as the arrangement." A pause. "The same as Della Marrow." The name landed. She watched it land, something cross Cleet's face that she hadn't expected. Not anger, not the cold, calculated expression he'd been wearing since he walked in, something older, and much more tired. "She didn't go along with it," he said. Very quiet, to himself as much as to her. That was all. "She didn't go along with it, and He stopped. The church was very still. "Where is she?" Nora asked. Long silence. "She went home," he said. "I let her go." Rawl wasn't. I hadn't understood yet what I was part of. He looked at his wrapped wrist. "By the time I did, I was already in it too far too." "There wasn't a clean way out," Josiah said from across the room. "There's one now." Cleet looked at him. "The marshal is coming," Josiah said. "Today, what you tell him, and when you tell him, will determine what happens to you after." He paused. "A man who comes forward voluntarily with a sworn statement is a different legal situation than a man who is brought in. You know that." Long silence. Clit looked at the room. at the 14 people watching him, then at the door, where his men had walked out, then at Nora and Cleet Marrow, who had come into a church in Dunbar, Colorado, with 2 hired men and an offer from Edmund Rawle, sat down in the nearest pew. "All right," he said. 14 people in the pews behind him did not move, did not speak. But the quality of the silence changed. The way it changes when something that has been wrong for a long time begins the slow, difficult process of becoming right. "Start from the beginning," Nora said. She had her pen and a clean sheet of paper. "I'll write it down." He talked for 2 hours. Nora wrote everything down: dates, names, locations, the exact sequence of events going back 3 years, the first meeting with Rawle in Denver, the arrangement with the correspondence agency, the specific instructions he had been given regarding which women to contact, what land they held, how to approach the transfer. Della Marrow, 1880. He told her that too. Della had been smarter than anyone had expected, had refused to sign, had walked out of Colorado with nothing but what she'd come with. He had let her go, because he hadn't been as far in then, because there had been a version of himself then that still found certain lines difficult to cross. By the time he reached Missouri and the correspondence that led to Nora, that version of himself had been overwritten by other things. Debt, obligation, the trap of having done enough that you can't get clean anymore by simply stopping. Nora wrote it all down. The room stayed. All 14 people, for the full 2 hours. Because this was their story too. This was the story of what had been done on top of their lives, and their land, and their decisions, and they had earned the right to hear it said out loud by the person who had done it. When Cleet finished, she read the statement back to him in full. He listened. Corrected 2 minor details, confirmed everything else. Father McRae witnessed it. Dorothy notarized it. Garrett, the man with the set jaw, whose brother had built that fence line with his own hands, signed it as second witness. His signature was steady and deliberate. The signature of a man who had decided something. "That's a sworn statement," Nora said, looking at Cleet, in front of witnesses. "You understand what that means?" "Yes," Cleet said. He sounded tired. Not guilty, exactly. Tiredness and guilt are different textures, but tired in the way of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has finally put it down and is only now understanding how long he's been carrying it. When the marshal arrives, Nora said that, "You tell him everything you just told me. Same detail. Same specificity." She paused. "I can't promise you anything. I'm not a prosecutor. But a man who comes forward voluntarily is a different situation. And you know that." "I know," he said. Dorothy handed Nora a coffee cup. Nora drank it without looking away from the document she was reading over one last time. Then she looked up at Josiah. He had been standing for 2 hours on a shoulder that had been grazed by a bullet the night before, and he had not sat down, and he had not made a single sound about any of it. "Sit down," she said. "I'm fine, Josiah. I've been shot worse than this. That's not reassuring information." It was meant to be. She looked at him, at the gray eyes, at the controlled posture that was working slightly harder than usual. "Sit down," she said, "or I will stop making progress on your legal case out of spite." A beat. He sat down. Dorothy, across the room, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Adjacent to one, Garrett from the back pew said, "Is she always like this?" "She arrived 2 days ago," Josiah said. "So I can only confirm, yes." Nora did not look up from the document, but something happened at the corners of her mouth that she declined to fully acknowledge. Marshal Eldon Pruitt arrived at 9:14 in the morning, not alone, 2 deputies. A warrant that, based on the look on his face when he arrived, he had apparently begun drafting before he finished reading the certified copies, which told Nora something about his intelligence and his feelings about Rawle's variety of criminal enterprise. He was a big man, mid-50s. The kind of face that has been through weather and hard decisions in approximately equal proportion, and has developed the steadiness that comes from learning to carry both. He looked at Nora when he walked through the church door. "You're the one who filed the challenge," he said. Yes, the certified copies. Yes, you're a lawyer. Bookkeeper. He looked at her for a moment with the assessment of a man who has learned to take the measure of people quickly. All right, he said. Show me. She showed him. She walked him through the complete package. Deed registration, fraud challenge, Dorothy's notarized documents, the railroad, letter, Cleet's sworn statement, the annotated map of 11 properties. Pruitt read, asked questions, 6 of them, direct and specific. She answered all 6, with the brevity of a woman who had learned in 48 hours that clarity was the most effective form of communication available in a crisis. He read Cleet's sworn statement twice. The second time slowly, he looked at Cleet, who was still sitting in the front pew. You'll repeat all of this to me, Pruitt said, in full. Before we leave this building. Yes, Cleet said. Pruitt looked at Josiah. Briggs. Pruitt Josiah said the handshake of 2 men who know each other well enough that the handshake is a conversation. Something passed between them that Nora could read the shape of, but not the specific content. Then Pruitt turned to her. We're going to need to move on Rawl quickly, he said, before he understands the scope of what you've built here. He already knows the scope, Nora said. He's been calculating since yesterday morning. She paused. What he doesn't know is the sworn statement. He doesn't know about Cleet. Pruitt absorbed this. The hotel, Josiah said. He'll be there. He doesn't run. Men like Rawl don't run. They recalculate. Then let's go while he's still calculating, Pruitt said. He looked at Nora. Mrs. Vane. You'll stay here a while. I'm coming, she said. He looked at her. Marshall, she said pleasantly, the documents are mine. The testimony is mine. I have been operating on approximately 4 hours of sleep for 2 days. I am coming. He looked at her for a moment. Stay behind the deputies, he said. Of course, she said, in a tone that meant, for now. The hotel on Main Street was 3 blocks from the church. The morning was bright, cold. The sharp clarity of Colorado in February, when the night has done its worst and the day arrives anyway, indifferent and clean and unreasonably beautiful. Nora walked. Josiah walked beside her. Same position he'd maintained since the first road, slightly to her left. The degree of angle that kept himself between her and the open street without making it a performance. She had stopped noticing it consciously. That was how you knew it was right. They reached the hotel. Pruitt pushed through the door. The dining room was half full. Morning light. The smell of coffee and eggs. Several heads turning at the sound of the door. At a table near the window, Edmund Rawl eating breakfast. Actually eating breakfast. Unhurried. Newspaper open on the table beside his plate. Coffee at his elbow. As if the morning had given him nothing to be concerned about. Which was, Nora understood, the point. That was the performance. Right up until it wasn't. He looked up when Pruitt walked in. He looked at the deputies. He looked at Josiah. And then he looked at Nora and his pleasant face. The face that had not changed in the county recorder's office. The face that had processed the stamped filing and the certified copies and the testimony of witnesses and had simply begun recalculating. Not collapse. Not collapse. Not fear. Nothing dramatic. Something smaller. And more significant, the look of a man who has, for the first time, fully seen the person who beat him. Mrs. Vane, he said. Mr. Rawl, she said. I underestimated you, he said. Yes, she said. You did. He set down his coffee cup, with the deliberate control of a man who was going to maintain his composure, regardless of what happened next. Who had decided, somewhere in the night, that this was the one thing left that was his. This won't be simple, he said. The legal proceedings will take time. And Fenwick, Thomas Fenwick, Nora said, whose notary stamps appear on 14 fraudulent documents in the county record, 3 of which were processed by an independent notary who kept her own copies and is prepared to testify. She looked at him. Dorothy Seal says hello. Something moved across Rawl's face, fast. Gone. But she had seen it, and she knew what it meant. It meant he hadn't known about Dorothy's copies. He had thought the link to Fenwick was protected. He had thought the chain, between himself and the fraudulent transfers was insulated enough to survive legal scrutiny. He had not accounted for a 65-year-old woman with a good box and a conscience that had been working on her for 8 months. "On your feet, Mr. Rawle," Pruitt said. Rawle looked at him. At the deputies. At Josiah, who was standing 4 feet from the table, with his bandaged shoulder and his gray eyes, and the quality of presence that simply was what it was. The 2 men at the table near the door, Crane and Decker. Josiah had told her the names during the night. Men she hadn't seen in the church, made a movement. "Don't," Josiah said. One word, same tone. The absolute, complete certainty that had stopped men on that frozen road 2 days ago now stopped 2 more men in a hotel dining room. Crane and Decker sat back down. Rawle stood slowly, with the dignity of a man who was going to maintain that particular shape of himself no matter what. Pruitt put handcuffs on Edmund Rawle in the dining room of the Dunbar Hotel on a February morning in 1883, and the sound of it was very small in the warm room. A quiet, metallic factoll looked at Nora one last time, not angry, not afraid. The expression of a man making a final calculation and finding that the math has genuinely changed. "You'll be a problem for a long time," he said, not as a threat. Almost as something like acknowledgement. "I intend to be," she said. Pruitt walked Rawle toward the door, and Nora watched Edmund Rawle, who had spent 2 years and a great deal of money building something he believed was airtight, who had sent fraudulent letters to a widow in Missouri, and organized a scheme that touched 11 families and 1 dead man's 40 acres, walk out of the Dunbar Hotel in handcuffs. The dining room was very quiet. Then someone at a back table started eating again. And that was that. Main Street, the morning light hitting on the snow on the Sangre de Cristo peaks at an angle that made them look close enough to touch, which they were not. But sometimes the light is more honest than the distance. People had come out onto the boardwalks, not a crowd. Just people, going about their February morning, who had stopped when they saw the marshal and the deputies and the man in handcuffs. The way people stop when something significant is happening, and they need to see it to believe it. Rawle walked past them, with his pleasant face restored to its default setting. Because men like Rawle never let you see them break, they just recalculate. Nora knew that. She was not naive about it. There would be attorneys and proceedings and long stretches of time, during which Rawle would work every angle available to him. But the deed was registered, the challenge was filed. Dorothy's copies were in the official record. Cleet's sworn statement was signed and witnessed and notarized. And Delamero was somewhere in the world, alive and unaccounted for, in the records, which meant she had made it out. Which mattered a great deal. Garrett was standing on the boardwalk across the street. He watched Rawle walk past and said nothing. His jaw was not set anymore. It was just his face. The face he'd been born with, that had been held in a particular shape for 2 years, and was now slowly returning to what it had always been underneath. Ida Marsh stood beside him, not speaking, just watching. Her hands at her sides instead of clasped. Nora stood on the boardwalk in front of the hotel and felt the cold and the feeling of something finished, which is never quite what you expect. Not triumph, not the feeling you described to yourself beforehand, in the anticipating of it. Something quieter and more permanent. Josiah came to stand beside her, not close enough to crowd her. Close enough that she was aware of him, the steadiness of him. The way he occupied space with that quality of presence she'd been trying to name since the road, and had finally understood was simply this. He was the kind of person who stayed. In a world full of people who looked away, who climbed back up on their stages and drove on, who had families to weigh against the cost, he was the kind of person who stayed and meant it. "He's going to fight this," she said. "Yes," Josiah said. "And he's going to lose." She looked at the street. At the town of Dunbar, doing what towns do after something fundamental shifts, the slow, collective rearranging of a community that has been organized around a fear it hadn't named, and is now learning what it looks like without it. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Josiah said, quietly, looking not at her but at the mountains, "Eli planted one apple tree, the year before he died, on the south side of the property, where the soil drains well." A pause. "It was 4 years old when he died. It would be 7 years old now." Another pause. I don't know if it survived. I haven't been back." Nora was quiet. "Apple trees take time," she said finally. "That's the whole point of them. You plant them for the person who comes after you." He turned to look at her then. The gray eyes. "Steady, you're 40 acres, he said. "And Eli's 40 acres north of Salita. There's a creek that runs through the southern portion of his land. I checked the hydrological survey last month." He paused. "It connects to the same water table as your father's property." She looked at him. "Those two properties share water," he said, "which means, legally, they have joint interests. Which means the case for both of them is stronger made together than either one alone." "You figured that out when?" she said. "Last night," he said, "around 2 in the morning, and you're telling me now." "I was waiting for daylight," he said. "Some things should be said in the open." She looked at him for a long moment. At the gray eyes and the scar, and the controlled face that was working. She had come to understand, not because he didn't feel things, but because he had learned to hold them carefully. "The way you hold things that matter, that's a long-term project," she said. "Yes," he said, "legal, complex, ongoing, yes, requiring someone with significant knowledge of land law and county deed records. Fortunately," he said, "I know someone who's been building expertise in that area for 3 years." She looked back at the street. "The cabin needs a new door," he said. She glanced at him. "And the roof on the south side has been losing shingles since November." He paused. "And the water line to the well froze twice this winter, which suggests the insulation needs work." "Mr. Briggs," she said slowly. "What I'm saying," he said, "is that there's a significant amount of work to be done on 40 acres along the creek bottom. And I'll be in Cutter County for the foreseeable future regardless. While the proceedings work through." "You're saying you'll need help," she said. "I'm saying the work is there if someone wanted to do it." She looked at him for a long moment. At the gray eyes that were paying attention the way they always did. Fully. Without agenda. Without the calculating quality that most people couldn't turn off even when they were trying. She looked at this man who had stepped out of a tree line when everyone else looked away. Who had given his real name to a man who had hurt her, because he believed in being known for what you do. Who had built a 3-year legal case, alone, in a valley because he had decided it was worth doing, regardless of whether anyone helped. Who had taken a bullet on the right side the night before, and not mentioned it until she made him sit down. "I have 40 acres along the creek bottom," she said. "I know. My deed was registered 2 days ago. I was there," he said. "And I'll be in Cutter County for the foreseeable future. While the proceedings work through." "Yes," he said. "So," she said, "it sounds like we'll both be here." "Yes," he said. "It does." A pause. She looked back at the peaks. He looked back at the peaks. Enormous. Indifferent. Catching the light and returning it without comment. "When the proceedings settle enough to travel," she said, "we could go look at the tree." He turned to her. 40 miles north," he said. "I know in March. The road is unreliable." "I've been on unreliable roads," she said. "April is better." "April," she said. Then April. He looked at her for a long moment. "April," he said. And that was all. But it was enough because it was true. And carefully meant, and not promised in a letter by someone who needed something from her. It was just a man who had decided, somewhere between a frozen road and a church full of witnesses, and a February morning on Main Street in Dunbar, that April was worth planning for. Dorothy appeared at Nora's elbow, because Dorothy always appeared. She looked at Nora, looked at Josiah, looked at the quality of the space between them, said nothing about any of it. "The dining room," she said, "has now been vacated of its most problematic occupant. I suggest we use it." She looked at Josiah. "You ate standing up again this morning. I watched you do it. I was monitoring the situation." The situation, Dorothy said, with the exact tone of a woman who has outlasted most of the arguments she's been in, can monitor itself for 20 minutes while you eat sitting down like a person. She's right, Nora said. You always agree with her. Josiah said. She's always right, Nora said. Dorothy had already started walking toward the hotel. Father McRae fell into step beside her. Garrett was crossing the street, Ida Marsh beside him. Others following. The people from the morning moving in the direction of warmth and food, and the particular human need to be in the same room with other people after something significant. Nora started walking. Josiah walked beside her, same position, left side. The degree of angle that had become, in 48 hours, a kind of language she had learned to speak and did not want to stop speaking. Cleet, she said. Pruitt has him, Josiah said. He'll hold him until he's formally processed. The sworn statement stands, a pause. He'll do what he said he'd do. He's tired enough. Yes, she said. I think so too. He let Della go, Josiah said, 3 years ago. When he still had a line he wouldn't cross. There's something in that, Nora said. Not absolution, he said. No, not absolution, she thought about it. But something. People don't stay exactly what they've become. Sometimes they find a version of themselves that's further back. That's still accessible. He was quiet. That's a generous way to think about it, he said. I'm a generous person, she said. He glanced at her, the sideways look she had come to recognize. The one that contained more than it showed. You told Rawl he'd underestimated you, he said. He had. You told Cleet his men would leave. They did. You told Blevins he'd stamp the filing. He did. How do you know, he said. How do you know what people are going to do? She considered this. I read documents for 3 years, she said, and documents are just people. They're what people do when they think no one's looking closely enough. She paused. Everyone has a line they won't cross. You just have to find it before they do. He walked beside her, processing that. The way he processed everything, completely, without rushing, taking it apart, and holding each piece up to see what it was made of. What's my line? He said. She looked at him. You already know your line, she said. You've known it for 3 years. That's why you're here. He said nothing. But the corner of his mouth moved, just barely, just enough. The hotel dining room was warm. Someone had built the fire up and opened the curtains, and the February light came in at an angle, and landed on the tables, and made everything look, for a moment, like a place where good things happened. Which was, Nora thought, perhaps what it was going to have to become. Dorothy sat at the center table and poured coffee for everyone within reach without being asked. Father McRae blessed the food, eggs and bread and salt pork, in a way that was brief and meant it. Garrett sat next to Ida Marsh, and they talked in low voices about something Nora couldn't quite hear, but didn't need to. Nora ate slowly, with attention. The way you eat when your body has been running on will and cold air and purpose for 2 days and has finally been given permission to remember. It has preferences. The eggs were good. She mentions to Dorothy. Dorothy said, I know. Josiah was sitting down. She had noticed this without commenting on it. He was sitting down at a table in the hotel dining room, eating breakfast, like a person who existed in a chair, which she had privately wondered about, based on all available evidence. She did not say anything about it. He caught her not saying anything about it, and something crossed his face. That was the closest thing she had ever seen from him to being caught off guard. Which was, she discovered, a very good look on him. Don't say it, he said. I'm not saying anything, she said. You're thinking it very loudly. I have no control over what I think. Dorothy, across the table, made the not quite a lock sound. At some point, the room was full. Not just their table. People from the morning. Families who had gathered in the church before dawn. People from Main Street, who had watched the marshal walk out of the hotel and had followed the feeling of something having shifted. People who had been through something together and needed, the way people always need, to be in the same room and confirm, yes, that happened. We did that. We're still here. Nora looked at all of it, at the room filling up. at Dorothy pouring coffee, at Father McRae talking with Garrett about something that made the set-jaw man actually smile for the first time since she'd seen him, at Josiah. Beside her, eating breakfast sitting down in a chair like a completely normal person. She thought about Missouri, about the house that smelled like her dead husband, and the pile of debt, and the $42, and the letter from the lawyer in Pueblo that said, "Your father left you 40 acres." She thought about how far 40 acres could travel, what it could mean, what it could become. In the right hands, with the right time. She thought about a 7-year-old apple tree on the south side of a property 40 miles north, whether it had survived the winters, whether it had, in the slow, patient way of apple trees, continued to grow, regardless of whether anyone was watching. She thought it probably had. She had arrived in Colorado 4 days ago with $42 and a carpet bag and a deed to land she had never seen. She had found, in those 4 days, that the land was worth considerably more than anyone had told her. And she had found, which she had not expected, which she had not been looking for, which had stepped out of a tree line on a frozen road and said, "Take your hands off," with the certainty of a man who meant every word he said. That she was worth considerably more than she had been told. The law would take months. Attorneys would argue. Courts would deliberate. Edmund Rawle would find every angle available to him and work it with patience and money and the practiced confidence of a man who had gotten this far. But the deed was registered, the fraud was documented. Dorothy's copies were in the official record, and in April there was an apple tree to check on. Which was not an ending. It was a beginning, a real one. Not promised in a letter, by someone who needed something from her. Not arranged by a man who saw a deed before he saw a face, built from the ground up. By two people who had looked straight at each other in the middle of a storm and decided the view was worth staying for. Outside, the peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Range caught the morning light and held it, and returned it to the sky the way they had for 10,000 years before any of this, and would for 10,000 more. The mountains did not care about Edmund Rawle's handcuffs, did not care about deeds or fraud or railroad surveys, or the particular justice of a sworn statement signed in a church at 6 in the morning by a tired man who had found his line at last. The mountains simply were. But this morning, in this dining room, with the fire built up and Dorothy pouring coffee, and Josiah sitting in a chair like a person while his shoulder healed, and Garrett telling Ida Marsh something that made her hands open and settle at rest in her lap. This morning, Nora felt something she had not felt in 14 months, something that pointed forward instead of back, something that said, "This is what it feels like to be in the right place." She picked up her coffee cup. Josiah was looking at her, not with the assessing look of a man who wants something, not with the careful, controlled attention of a man who has learned not to show too much, just looking at her. The way you look at something that matters. Openly, without armor, she looked back, and that was enough, more than enough. It was, in fact, everything they needed to start.